Hello and welcome. I'm Annette Reeder from thebiblicalnutritionist.com. And today we're going to talk about salt. We're going to talk about what is the best and worst salts. This may surprise you if you have not done much in-depth study on salt and you've ever wondered about the low salt diet that's suggested all of the time versus yet salt is a natural food. It is what we are supposed to eat. So where's all of that fit in having a healthy body? So we're going to talk about that today. What's the best and worst salt? And I'm going to help you with the help of my guest to be able to understand what is the difference between refined salt, sea salt, and then even Himalayan salt. Is one better than the other? We're going to talk about it today. Well, before we get started, please go ahead and hit the like and subscribe because I want to continue sharing with you God's recipe for excellent health, which does include salt. If we are to be the salt of the earth, we need to know which salt is going to be best for us. Today, I am welcoming Dr. David Brownstein. I've been looking forward to this interview for quite a while because anytime that we can learn the difference between how a product is made, how God created an ingredient, and how it can benefit us versus the medical society, which is actually telling us, no, that's harmful, then we get into a questioning time. Yet the truth will always come through. And Dr. Brownstein has written more than a dozen bestseller books. One of them we're going to talk about today is Salt Your Way to Health. And I have here the second edition. I just have been reading this throughout vacation time and just so many takeaways in this book. I know you're going to love the book. We'll put a link to it down below and a link to his website. Dr. David Brownstein is the medical director for the Center for Holistic Medicine in West Bloomfield, Michigan. All that to say, welcome, Dr. Brownstein. I am so happy to have you here as our guest.
I'm honored to be here, Annette, and thanks for having me. And it was a great introduction. You know, I was taught in medical school, salt is bad for you. Salt causes hypertension. Nobody needs to add salt to anything. The less salt you have, the better you'll be. The less salt you have, the better your blood pressure will be. And that was my extent of my medical training. And fortunately or unfortunately, I realized that was incorrect training. And let's get into it.
Let's do that. So get us started. What is the best and worst salt? And what is the risk of not understanding the difference?
Well, look, I gave you what my medical training was. Salt was salt, and that was it. I wasn't really interested in salt until I started, I went to med school to be a conventional doctor. I didn't have any holistic leanings, before that. And a short version of my story is my turning point came when my dad was really sick with heart disease for a long period of time. But 6 months into my practice of conventional medicine, I realized he was going to die. And I was just waiting for the phone call that he died. And I met a chiropractor who turned me around and taught me about functional biochemistry and nutrition. And I started to relook at things and started to relook at everything. And salt was one of those things. And I realized that the second major constituent in the human body was salt. I never thought we were designed inappropriately. Whoever put the blueprint together for us knew what he or she was doing. They gave us a good blueprint, and if we supply the human body the blueprint with the basic raw materials, it can do pretty wonderful things through old age. We should be able to age gracefully and not fall apart as we get older and keep our brain function. I mean, look, there's no question at 90 years old, the body's going to be different than it is at 20 years old, but the brain can be just as sharp. And you should be able to think clearly and do things and accomplish things through old age. So my turning point in salt came shortly after I started looking at biochemistry and physiology and realizing sodium and chloride were needed for thousands of different reactions in the body. They're needed to make ATP or energy molecules. They're needed to make anything in the body, really. And I started to think about, low salt is what I was taught, low salt, low salt, low salt. Well, the second major constituent in the human body next to salt is water. So the number one thing I found over the years is people need to keep hydrated, drink adequate amounts of water. Number two is they need to maintain adequate amounts of salt. So when I started to prescribe salt for my patients, I didn't really know what salt was or the difference between refined and unrefined salt. And I went back to the books and went back to the literature and started to read about it and look at it. And, you know, as a holistic physician, 30 years ago when I turned around towards doing that, I realized that natural things support the human biochemistry. Well, almost all the drug therapies I was taught in med school, probably 99+%, were either blocking receptors or poisoning enzymes in the body. Now, there's a time and a place to block enzymes or poison enzymes and block receptors. If you're in the middle of an acute heart attack or a stroke, you want to be in a conventional emergency room where those doctors are trained to treat acute stroke and heart attack quickly. And it can save your life and save you a lot of trouble to treat those illnesses early. And you're going to, drug therapies are going to be used. So there's a time and a place for them. But for chronic care, most of the chronically used drug therapies aren't the right thing to do. So I started to look at physiology and biochemistry in my patients and realizing that the salt was such an important item that I had to learn about salt. So I went to the salt literature. And when I went to the conventional salt literature and to the manufacturers of refined salt, I found an interesting thing where they said that the refining process of salt was needed to remove the impurities in salt. Well, I looked up what the impurities were in unrefined salt, and the impurities were minerals. So the big difference between refined salt and unrefined salt. Now, Annette, let's for our listeners and for you and I, let's get our terminology straight here. Some people will say sea salt is better than regular salt. All salt came from the ocean at some point in its lifetime. All salt can be called sea salt. Refined salt, unrefined salt, regular table salt in restaurants everywhere, the thin white stuff can be called sea salt. So sea salt is an irrelevant term for me. Refined and unrefined. So refined salt refers to the refining process of removing the minerals in salt and leaving sodium and chloride with a few toxic items added to it, such as ferrocyanide, aluminum silicate, and bleach to bleach it white. So because the salt manufacturers think that this white appearance is more appealing to us. But there's no minerals in that salt. Unrefined salt, such as what you mentioned in the intro, Redmond's real salt, Selena's Celtic brand salt, and Himalayan salt have over 80 trace minerals in there that are needed for many functions in our body, hundreds of different reactions in the body. So I didn't think it took rocket science to realize that unrefined salt would be a better choice for my patients. And I started to have my patients use unrefined salt as a part of their routine and just sort of a basic item like drinking water, but also as a medical item. And I found really good results with it. Now, I never expected to write that book that you held up at the beginning. Um, I had to use salt. I found salt very helpful for my patients. We can get into that, what it's helpful for. And I never really thought about it much. I thought about salt like I thought about water. People need to drink water. People need to have adequate amounts of salt in the diet. And I was finishing my iodine book. And then there was an article in the Detroit Free Press, a Tuesday article where they write about a health section that's usually not about health, usually about the drug therapy that they want to write about. But
Exactly.
there was a question to the nutritionist: is there any difference between sea salt and refined salt? And tables, they didn't say refined. They said, is there any difference between sea salt and table salt? And the nutritionist answered the question, no, there's no difference. Both contain too much sodium and chloride, and both should be limited in the diet. It's a quick answer. I remember reading that. I got irritated by it. I cut it out. I taped it above my computer screen. So as I was finishing my iodine book, I was looking at it all the time, and I knew what my next book was going to be. And that's how that salt book came out. So I'm in the weeds right now, and I forgot your question to me, but that's how that book came about. I've been lecturing and writing about salt and why we don't need low salt diets. The vast majority of us don't need low salt diets. And the only ones that really need to consider a low salt diet are those with congestive heart failure and those with kidney failure. But for the rest of us with normal kidney function, without congestive heart failure, salt's an essential item we can't live without, as you mentioned. Salt's mentioned in the Bible numerous times. Salt is an integral part of the human body as much as water. And I consider having adequate amounts of salt doing the basics, like just like drinking water, just like breathing air. That I think that's how important salt is.
Well, to help someone identify that they may be one, eating the wrong salt or not having enough salt in their diet, what are some common symptoms that someone would have lacking salt in their diet?
All right. So one of the common complaints I hear, on probably at a daily basis in my office is people complain of leg cramps and foot cramps. Um, so any cramp in the body, the first thing that dings in my head is they're salt deficient. And got a call yesterday from somebody. She's having bad foot and leg cramps at night, and it's, having to get out of bed, and she's fairly miserable with it. And I said, "You're not getting enough salt." She goes, "How much?" I'm like, "Till the cramps go away." She said, "How much is that?" I said, "Till the cramps go away."
Yeah,
So,
good point.
so she said, "How much should I take?" I said, "Well, let's take a teaspoon more than you're doing right now, whatever it is. Add it throughout the day and a little pinch at bedtime of unrefined salt. Um, and if the cramps don't go away, add in 2 teaspoons. And if the cramps go away, don't go away, add another teaspoon. But I can tell you, for the vast, vast majority of people, 1 or 2 teaspoons of unrefined salt a day gets rid of leg and foot cramps. So that's a common complaint. Another complaint is headaches, hypertension. They in med school I was taught salt's going to give you hypertension.
Right.
They based that recommendation on old studies where they fed rats enormous amounts of salt that are impossible for us to, well, we could eat them, I guess. I don't even know how you get that amount in. It was an enormous amount of salt, and the rat blood pressure went up, and they extrapolated that to human beings. We're not talking about hundreds of grams of salt. We're not talking about anywhere near those numbers. So one of the things that, when I see a hypertensive patients, I do a lot of blood work on my patients on the first visit, and electrolytes are always part of that: sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium, basic electrolytes. And the salt reference range looks like this, from this being the low end, this being the high range. And it goes from about 130, maybe 133 on the low end to 141 on the high range. The problem is that people over here near the low part of the range, they're low on salt. It's not telling, it doesn't tell you what the optimal range is. The optimal range for salt's over here. So I always tell people an optimal level of sodium should be 141 milliequivalents per liter or higher. An optimal level of chloride should be about 103 to 105 milliequivalents per liter or higher. Most people are low in salt. So when you're low in salt, if you eat a low salt diet, um, again, whoever designed us perfectly if we supply the body with the basic raw materials it needs. And he designed us to get adequate amounts of salt in our diet. And the reason for that is you can't make ATP molecules, energy molecules. You can't run basic reactions in the body. Your electrical activity doesn't run smoothly if you don't have enough salt. So we need, and we have this taste for salt for a purpose. Um, so so the reference ranges for salt are too large. They should be moved up a little bit. And I frequently recommend for my patients to take salt. And it's been a wonderful addition to my diet. That's why I wrote this book. I made it to try and simple for people to understand. And when you eat a low salt diet, it triggers your body tightly controls salt within a really sodium within a really tight window because we can't live without it. Every cell needs it. It's an essential item. We can't manufacture it. So if you're low on salt, these triggering hormones are released from your adrenal glands and your kidneys to help you absorb more sodium from your diet. Well, these triggering hormones include aldosterone and renin and some other ones, but they all raise blood pressure. So if you want to create hypertension, just put people on a low salt diet who it'll trigger these hormones. Your blood pressure will go up because the arteries shrink a little bit because you get less water and you become dehydrated from that. And one of the ways to relieve hypertension in the vast majority of people that are suffering from it is put them on more salt. Now, again, that does not include people with congestive heart failure and people with renal failure. They are different beings, and those people might swell up from the salt that I'm recommending. But average doses of unrefined salts are like a teaspoon or 2 teaspoons a day for the vast majority of people. But they have to drink adequate amounts of water with that too. So
Right.
water goes right along with salt, which is how we were designed. water is our major constituent in the body. Salt's a second major ingredient. It's like, like when you're making stuff in the kitchen. That's whoever designed us was doing that and did it pretty well and designed us to have salt number two constituent, water the number one constituent.
Exactly. So thinking about that, we have a lot of young moms following our channel and they've got kids. How do kids show a deficiency in salt?
When my wife and I were raising children, um, we had a bowl of unrefined salt on our table, and we would encourage the kids to use their hands, take it and spread it over the food, put a little bit in the water whenever we were having dinner or whenever having any meal. My kids are 29 and 30 these days. They're working in my office with me. They're both doctors, which is the most wonderful thing in the world. Both
Yes, I can
my
see that.
girls. And we go to restaurants, if we go to dinner, one of us has salt. And um, so we encouraged our kids to salt their food, put a little bit of salt in their water. My kids now in adult age are doing that in their daily lifestyle. And you know, um, that's how we did it, and that's how I encouraged my patients to do it.
I love that. I love that a lot. All right. So go ahead and share with us what's the difference between refined salt, sea salt, and then Himalayan, and what should people choose? You've pretty much kind of answered this already, but I want to bring it back into just a more
Okay.
consolidated answer.
So refined salt, the refining process of salt, similar to the refining process of flour and sugar and oils and everything else, is done for a purpose. The purpose is to prolong shelf life. So the food company can make more money on the product. When they remove all the living things in food, it can sit on the shelf forever and not change. And there's no expiration date or an expiration date that's far out. And they can make more money per product. So that's why the refining process is done. It's the same thing with salt. So the salt manufacturers um, have a refining process where they remove the minerals and they leave the final product 98 or 99% sodium and chloride, and then some toxic items added to it in the refining process and the bleaching process of it, as I mentioned earlier, such as ferrocyanide, aluminum silicate, um, and a couple of other things. Um, Unrefined salt has about 80% sodium and chloride in it, and then about 20% of trace minerals. That's the big difference from it. You can visually see that because unrefined salt has some color to it. The color is the minerals in it. Now, different salt has different colors to it. And one patient who was suffering from high blood pressure and headaches, when I told him to up his salt intake, both those problems got better, bought me this from I don't know where he got it from, but they were little tubes of salt from around the world. There was about 24 of them, and they're all different colors. They're all marked on what area of the world they came from. I have it up in my kitchen just as a visual piece. And some of the salts are brown, some of the salts are a little grayish color, some are a little bluish color, depending on what the minerals come from. But you can easily tell refined salt. It's in many households and it's in restaurants. Morton's table salt is an example of that. It's very fine. It can go through any of the smallest pouring item that you can put out there. Unrefined salt is usually a little bit thicker because of the minerals in it. And you can either just use it and pick it up with your hands and put it in your food, or you can grind it and use it on your food. So that's really the big difference from it. And um, you know, it doesn't. I can tell you from checking chemistries over 30 years, everybody's deficient on nutrients. We don't. We've messed with our soil and messed with our food supply enough. I don't care how organic you're eating right now. When I do a full nutritional and hormonal evaluation, which I do on everybody, I always find nutritional deficiencies. And so it makes common sense and it makes nutritional sense. The extra minerals in unrefined salt are going to be a better choice for us than zero minerals in refined salt.
Okay. And what about Celtic versus Himalayan?
So there's three major, there are other unrefined salts out there. I have no financial dealings with any company. So the three major ones are really Selena's Celtic brand salt, Himalayan salt, and Redmond's real salt. So they come from different sources. Selena's Celtic brand salt comes from France. They use a 2,000-year-old technique to mine the salt out of the ocean. Um, Himalayan salt comes from the Himalayas, and they get it from a mountain and they mine it out of the mountain. and Redmond's real salt comes from salt mines in the ground in Utah. All three have over 80 trace minerals in it. I have tested all three of those salts 4 times in my career to look for heavy metal toxicity and to look for their contents of those minerals. They've all tested about the same. Um, having having said that, I think all three are fine. I think all three are interchangeable. I don't find clinically any big difference with all three. And I think all three are much better choices than the refined salt choices out there. And the cool thing is that these three products, they're a little bit more money than refined salt, but really not much more. And a bag of Himalayan salt or Celtic brand salt or Redmond salt can last a family a long time. And it's a couple of bucks. It's really not that expensive, in the long run.
And is all Himalayan salt the same?
Well, I mean, it depends on where they're getting from. If you're getting a salt from over here in this mountaintop and maybe another salt from over here, the mineral content will be different with it. But the 4 times I've tested them, I didn't find any major heavy metal toxicities. And I found the mineral content, although different in different salts, some had a little more magnesium than others. They were all they weren't the same, but they all contained a decent amount of trace minerals that we need without any toxic ingredients at high levels.
Okay. Another way to rephrase that question is, can there be any fake or altered Himalayan salts on the market?
I'm sure there are. I mean, look, we, if people aren't questioning everything these days that we're seeing on TV and we're seeing on the marketplace, I don't know what you're going to do because, at this point, how do you trust anything of, what's
Right.
being told to us? But, and I'm not saying trust me either. In this book, in the back of the book, I have all the references every book that I've written, I fully reference in the back of the books. I tell when I lecture and I tell, my patients, look, don't believe me, go pull my references and I'm just writing about what works. And, it's easy for me to write these books because I just write about what works in my practice. And, I was told salt's such a dangerous item for the human body. And as I start looking at the biochemistry and looking at all these pathways that require sodium and chloride to function normally, I'm like, come on, that just doesn't make sense to me. Our maker would not have made us so dependent on these natural items if they were toxic to us. That's not how we're designed. Toxicity is easy. We know what items are toxic to us. The natural items are what we should be using to support the human biochemistry. And that's not what's happening in medicine these days. We're using too many drug therapies that poison enzymes and block receptors.
Right. I so agree with you too. All right. Well, this has been incredibly informative, and we will put a link to your book down below. It's not like you need a college degree to read it. You wrote it extremely well for anyone of all levels of learning, and so they can all have a great takeaway from it. I'm also very I love the fact that in the index you mentioned so many of the health challenges people are going through: adrenal fatigue, asthma, autoimmune disorders, calcium, how to deal with that, cancer, cholesterol, chronic fatigue, diabetes, elevated cholesterol. I mean, that's just the first page of the index. So pretty much you address so many health challenges that people are facing. And yet it comes down to the simple fact that we need real salt. No more of the fake, when it rains, it pours, just real salt. Get the minerals back in. We don't even have to have the science knowledge that you have to understand if God put 80 minerals in a grain of salt and man strips it away to look pretty and bright, we are going to lack. Our health is going to represent a lacking of those minerals. And minerals are so, when you look at, for, vitamin C, we need this many thousand milligrams to help heal the body. But with minerals, we just need a tiny bit because they're so exponentially explosive in the cell where they cause such an amazing change. And yet that was already put in the salt.
It was put in the salt for a reason. It was put in the salt for us. And it was not put in the salt for us to take it out and call it impurities and
Right.
who knows what they do with it when they take it out. I'm sure they call it impurities in salt, so they probably discard it. And I really appreciate you saying you don't need a college degree to read my books because I've always felt when I'm reading other people's writings that if I'm confused, either what I've come to realize after 30 years of practicing holistic medicine, if I'm confused with reading something, either the author doesn't know what they're talking about or they're trying to hide something.
Yes.
Because it should be easy. The human body was designed marvelously. Blueprint is there, and it should be easy to understand what's going to support it and what's going to block and poison it. And that's how I try and write my book. So I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah. And so what we teach here is three principles. Number one, eat the foods that God called good for us. And it is clear in scripture that salt was made for us to enjoy. Number two, eat it as close to the way he designed it. Well, that's where we get into troubles, where we start accepting a lab experiment, which is what I call them, lab experiment versus the real food. And there we have the cellular dysfunction. And number three, don't let any food become a God. And typically real salt, and my husband loves salt, and there's no way salt can become a god if it is real salt, because the minerals actually you use less, because you get a better flavor and you get a better result in the cellular level. So your body's like, okay, that little bit was all we needed. Whereas the Morton salt is like you have to keep piling it on and piling it on to get that effect, which actually never really satisfies. But we actually use less, even though what you're encouraging is for people maybe a fourth of a teaspoon or half a teaspoon to get started. The amazing changes in the cellular level with just that change, it's just phenomenal what happens in the cells. So I greatly appreciate you on this. Is there anything else you want to share that we might have missed in this video?
Just I'd like to tell the listener, if you're not feeling good and you're not feeling the way you want to feel and there's health problems, you're not getting answers, search around. That this is a holistic doctor who went to med school to model himself after his family doctor. I didn't grow up in a holistic household. We didn't take any vitamins. We didn't talk about any of that stuff. And we went to the doctor when we were sick. We took whatever the doctor said. We never questioned anything. I went to med school for that in mind, that I was going to learn everything I needed to know. And I thought when I graduated med school and residency, the drugs were the answer for everything. And, you know, that was my calling in life. And 6 months into that, I realized this is not my calling. There's a problem here. I'm not helping people. And I got turned on to holistic medicine. And there's answers out there when you're not feeling good. You might have to search for them. You might have to do some legwork on your own, but keep searching. Find a holistic doctor as part of your healthcare team. They can help you no matter what's going on. And there's enough of us out there. As long as they're a true holistic doctor, there's a lot of people that put those signs out there and say they are, and they're not really. I mean, I can sniff them out in about 30 seconds. But I think medicine's a wonderful thing, and it's trying to support the human body and give it its basic raw materials and what it needs has been my calling for 30 years, and hopefully I can do it another 30 years. So don't give up. Keep searching around. Find a doctor who's going to work with you, who's going to support you, not fight back against you, and not tell you don't know what you're talking about, and not humiliate you or disregard whatever you're saying.
With that being said, does your office treat outside? Do you treat telehealth? Do you do that type of referral?
We treat telehealth, but we you have to come the first visit. We have to see you.
Okay.
Um, the when COVID happened and they allowed telehealth for everything at that point. I remember my office manager said we should go telehealth, and first off, I wasn't closing my office. I and work with a doctor who didn't close his or her office during COVID. You I took an oath in med school to treat patients. Some are sick, some aren't sick. Their health comes before my health. I wasn't closing my office during COVID. And I have some health issues that COVID would not be. Trust me, I was as scared as everybody else with it, but I'm a doctor. I went to med school for a reason, and that was my calling, and I'm not changing. So, find a doctor who stayed open during COVID as well, and most of the holistic doctors did.
Right. All right. So for them to receive your services, they need to come
Telehealth.
for the first time.
So
And
yeah, telehealth. So we switched to telehealth. That lasted about half of a morning with me, and I told my office manager, put them back. I'm not treating patients this way. I need to look at them. I need to touch them. I need to listen to them. I need to use these to help diagnose, and it wasn't going to work through a TV screen. So
got it.
we do want to see them once, and then periodically, after that. But I do some telehealth on patients that move out of state, or as long as I know them well enough, and that's how we feel. So we're open to it, but they got to come first time. We're still seeing new patients. I have my two daughters are there. They're seeing new patients, and we have a really neat office. We do a lot of really cool therapies that many people are doing these days.
That sounds fabulous. And Michigan's in the middle of the country, so pretty much, well, northern middle, so they can make it there.
And just remember the national champion, Michigan Wolverines, right
Yeah,
here.
I caught that. I caught that. I
Okay,
was trying
just
to
wanted to bring that
ignore
up for everybody.
that. That's right. You're promoting it well. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Brownstein, for sharing with us this basic knowledge that we should have known from the beginning of time. And yet we bought into a lie that medical science knew better in this regard, but they didn't. And it's always good to know that what God created is always comes back to He is the one who heals. And He gave us what we needed to heal. And just eating real food, unaltered, real food always changes the cells faster than anything. So it's my delight to have you here today. I thank you for joining us, and I can't wait to read the comments about this. We'll put links to your book down below, to your website where they can find your location and book that appointment with you. And just really understand, you gave us great blood values for people to look at their blood work to see where they are. So they can go back and rewatch this video to catch those lab values that you mentioned. They can look into their sodium and their chloride numbers, see where they were on their last visit. And until next time, for those of you watching, thanks for being a part of the Biblical Nutritionist family. And remember, God loves you with an amazing, unending love. Thanks for watching.